Senator Toomey.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Just to follow up on this, my own perspective on the question that Senator King posed is that the optimal size of government depends in part on how much growth you want to have. I mean, I think the evidence is overwhelmingly clear. Societies that have government expenditures smaller as a percentage of their economy have higher standard of living. They have higher growth, higher income, higher wages, and greater wealth. And countries that have the government occupying a larger segment of the economy, they have slower growth, fewer jobs, lower standard of living, and lower income. So a big part of this comes down to how much prosperity do we want? If we want more, we'll spend less. And it makes sense, not only because the government spends money through a political process that's not following the kind of economic incentives that the markets use, but also it has to be paid for. This spending always ultimately gets paid for by confiscating it from the more productive private sector, which brings me to the sequester, which I just want to stress for the record that despite the the apocalyptic descriptions about this, this is really small in the context of total spending and the economy. Where the federal government has doubled its spending in the last 10 years. And we're talking about a 2.5% reduction in spending from that 100% growth. And by the way, that's budget authority. Actual outlays for this year, it's about 1.25%. That's 1/4% of GDP. This is not some kind of severe austerity plan. Now, I think it could be done more wisely, and I wanted to see if there was any disagreement on the idea that since the current law forces this across-the-board cuts with no opportunity to exercise any discretion with respect to those spending areas that have more merit and those that have less, could you comment on whether you think it makes sense for us to, in the event that the sequester goes forward, to grant to OMB and the Defense Department in their respective areas the flexibility to make these cuts in a more thoughtful fashion? Does that make sense to anybody?
Short answer is yes, very much so. And I think the private sector response would be huge because it would show Washington trying, rather than trying to maximize the damage from the sequester, it would be trying to reduce the damage or make it less onerous than they've made it out to be.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on that?
Yes, I would disagree with that comment because while it sounds better to make flexibility, in fact, if what it means is we're going to stick with the cuts at the level of the sequester and then leave it up to NIH and NSF to make the cuts in a slightly better fashion, they can do that. But if that becomes the new baseline, all you've done is succeeded in cutting NIH and NSF, letting them figure out.
Let me just interrupt for a second, because it's not, depending on how you formulate this, it's not necessarily the case that NIH per se has to take the cut.
Right.
If the administration has the discretion across all non-defense categories, they might decide that, I don't know, building new taxiways on a seldom used airport somewhere should be a lower priority than NIH.
Yeah, the problem is it's going to look like a good solution. Everyone's going to say, great, now they can make their own decisions. But the bottom line is going to be cuts in the areas where we need investment because our competitors are investing and we're reducing.
Okay, but that sounds like an argument that we can't cut anywhere. And when we've had a government that has doubled in size in the last 10 years, to think that we can't find, a little over 1 penny on every dollar anywhere throughout this government strikes me as not very appropriate. Let me ask a specific question, if I could, of Mr. Ferguson, because I know you touched on the medical device tax, and as you may know, there's a bipartisan concern that this is a really egregiously badly designed tax. That happens to be my view, in part because it applies to sales, irrespective of whether a company is making any money. And if I understood your testimony correctly, am I right in understanding that because of the medical device tax, and if it stays in effect, you will forego expanding production in the United States of medical device manufacturing?
Yes, and our future growth will have to be in Ireland or Denmark or Australia.
So this medical device tax, in your view, is this a pretty direct incentive to go overseas, go offshore, create jobs somewhere else?
When combined with other issues, the answer is yes. And that's sort of the straw that broke the camel's back. But the other thing is it falls directly on R&D, because when you look at the size of this type of tax and it's an expense, then the only places you've got are employees or R&D, or you got to go look for cost savings someplace else.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much,
Madam Chair.
Senator King.